She still remembered how the candlelight flickered against the polished crystal, how the scent of cinnamon and roasted ham filled the room, and how no one seemed to breathe when her father spoke. "I've put up with you for a long time, but I've had enough. Get out of here." The silence that followed wasn't shock, it was agreement, and that was what hurt the most. Elizabeth leaned back in the hotel chair, eyes swollen, fingers curled around a lukewarm cup of tea. It had been 3 days since that dinner, and the scene replayed in her mind in nauseating detail, frame by frame. Every glance, every clenched jaw, every fork tapping on china. She tried to make sense of it. How had it come to this? Their relationship had never been simple. Richard Worthington had always been a man of unyielding principles, rigid as steel, with a voice that could silence a room. He demanded excellence, obedience, and above all, control. And Elizabeth, she had always been stubborn. Even as a child, she questioned everything, refused to sit still, never quite fit the mold he tried to cast for her. But she wasn't a child anymore. At 41, she was the executive director of a thriving nonprofit, financially independent, respected by colleagues. She paid her parents' mortgage, their medical bills, even groceries, out of duty or maybe guilt, hoping love might one day be earned. The days before Christmas had been tense. Her mother, Vivian, called twice about the tree. "Your father doesn't want a fake one this year. He says if you're coming, you can afford to do it properly." Elizabeth had offered to send a delivery, but that wasn't the point. The point was obedience, presence, submission. When she arrived 2 days before Christmas, the house already felt like a pressure cooker. Her father barely lifted his eyes from his chair. "Still wearing those heels, huh?" he muttered. It was a dig. He always had one ready. Her mother flitted between rooms, overcompensating with casseroles and spiced cider, avoiding any conversation that went deeper than the weather. Tyler, her younger brother, brought his new girlfriend, pretending he didn't notice the tension suffocating every hallway. By Christmas Eve, Elizabeth had considered leaving. She'd almost booked a flight back to Boston, told herself she'd sent a card and some money, and that would be it. But guilt and pride had kept her there. She didn't want to give her father the satisfaction of thinking he'd won. Then came Christmas dinner. The confrontation wasn't loud, but it was final. A remark about the way she dismissed Tyler's girlfriend, a sarcastic retort about her father's outdated views, and the explosion unfolded in slow motion. It was the third day back, and every wall in the Worthington home seemed closer than before. Elizabeth sat by the window in the upstairs study, the only room no one entered. Outside, frost had feathered the edges of the glass, casting soft white patterns on the carpet. She had retreated here after breakfast, following another pointed comment from her father about how people who work too much tend to forget what matters. He never said it directly. He never had to. Downstairs, Vivian hummed quietly while washing dishes that had already gone through the dishwasher. Tyler talked loudly on the phone in the den about a startup he wanted to invest in with money he didn't have, and his new girlfriend, Natalie, helped Vivian with ribbons and bows, her voice overly sweet, like she was auditioning for a family she didn't yet understand. Elizabeth had tried to contribute. She bought the tree. She brought the wine. She paid for the food on the table. And yet, there was always an edge to every interaction, as if her presence carried a price. The night before, she had stayed up late with a book, only to overhear her parents arguing faintly through the vent. "She makes everything about herself," Richard had said. "Always has. All that money she throws around, it's just noise." "She's trying," Vivian replied, her voice thin, defeated. Elizabeth hadn't cried. Not then. But the words hollowed something inside her. She had come out of duty, maybe some misplaced sense of loyalty. But the house didn't want her. Not really. It wanted her money. Her silence. She closed the book and stood. The quiet was too loud. Downstairs, she offered to help Vivian with the Christmas table setup. "Oh, don't worry about it, darling," her mother said quickly. "Natalie and I have a system." Of course they did. "Did you get the wine?" Vivian added, glancing at the door. "Yes, it's in the car. I'll bring it in." When she stepped outside, the air bit sharply at her face. The driveway was slick with ice. She reached into the back seat, grabbing the bag of carefully selected bottles, when she heard the front door creak. "Still playing delivery girl, I see," Richard said from the top step, arms crossed. She turned to face him. "I thought I'd contribute." He scoffed. "You always think you're contributing." Elizabeth froze. It was never one thing with him. Always these cuts, so clean, so subtle, you barely noticed until you were bleeding. She walked past him back into the house. "You're welcome," she said quietly. "I didn't say thank you," he muttered. "And I won't." She stopped, turned to look at him. His face was as closed off as ever. For a brief moment she wanted to scream, to lay it all out. The money, the years of support, the fact that she had made their retirement possible. But what would it change? He wouldn't hear her. He never had. Upstairs, she pulled out her phone, needing to feel something outside of this house. The message from Mara was still there. "Hey, it's been a while. I heard you were home. Want to get coffee?" Elizabeth stared, then typed back. When the coffee shop was nearly empty, save for a pair of college students studying in the corner and an elderly man reading the paper by the window, she stirred her cappuccino, watching the foam collapse in slow spirals. When Mara arrived, hair tucked under a gray wool beanie, cheeks flushed from the cold, she looked almost exactly the same. "Liz," she said warmly, sliding into the seat across from her. "God, it's good to see you." Elizabeth smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You too. Thanks for texting. I wasn't sure you'd want to talk." Mara laughed softly. "I've wanted to talk for years. I just didn't know how to start." The conversation drifted for a few minutes. How long it had been, how strange the holidays could feel. Then something shifted. Mara leaned in, voice quiet. "Tyler told me you were home. I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to warn you." Elizabeth blinked. "Warn me?" Mara hesitated. "Your dad's been talking a lot about you, saying you're entitled, self-absorbed, that you use money to manipulate everyone, that you always make things worse when you show up." A heavy silence passed between them. Elizabeth didn't respond. She didn't need to. Mara continued carefully. "I saw how they treated you. I tried to say something once. Remember Thanksgiving 3 years ago? You were helping in the kitchen, and your dad called you a failure in heels. Your mom just kept basting the turkey like she hadn't heard a thing." Elizabeth's throat tightened. "I do remember," she said. "That was the last time she came for Thanksgiving. I thought you might want someone to remind you you're not crazy." Elizabeth smiled again, this time almost reaching her eyes. "Thank you." They talked for nearly an hour about what it was like being around the Worthingtons, about Tyler's spiral after his breakup, and the chilling efficiency with which the family ignored pain, both their own and others. When they parted, Mara hugged her tightly. "Whatever happens this week, remember who you are outside that house." Elizabeth walked back through the snow slowly, the weight of those words following her like a shadow. It was Christmas Eve. The house glowed warmly from the outside, gold lights, a plastic Santa on the porch, but inside it felt colder than the winter wind. Christmas Day arrived in silence. No music, no laughter. Breakfast was stiff, transactional. Dinner was worse. The table had been set with a formality that felt almost ironic. Silver cutlery, fine china, candles Elizabeth had brought. Vivian said grace, her voice trembling slightly. Tyler's girlfriend passed the bread basket, forcing a smile. Elizabeth had barely touched her food when the air shifted. "You know," Richard said suddenly, slicing into his roast, "I've put up with you for a long time." All heads turned. "You walk in here with your money and your opinions, and we're all supposed to be grateful you decided to show up." Elizabeth's fork hovered above her plate. Richard's voice didn't rise, but the words cut deep. "I've had enough. You make everything harder. You poison every room you enter, so let me make this clear. Get out. I don't want you here." Vivian flinched but said nothing. Tyler blinked, said nothing. Elizabeth looked from one face to the next. The silence that followed wasn't surprise. It was consent. She stood slowly, folded her napkin. Understood. Upstairs, she packed in silence. No one knocked. No one called after her. As she slid into her car and turned the engine over, her hands shook. That night, back at the hotel, she logged into her bank account and terminated the monthly payments. Mortgage, insurance, utilities canceled. For the first time in years, Elizabeth took her own side. 2 days after Christmas, she sat by the fireplace in her hotel room, staring at the flickering flames without really seeing them. The silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like clarity. She hadn't answered any calls since that night. There hadn't been many, just 2 from an unknown number and 1 from her mother, which she let go to voicemail. Vivian's message was brief and oddly formal. "Elizabeth, your father's upset. Maybe we could talk when you calm down." When she calmed down. It would have been laughable if it weren't so predictable. The next morning, Mara met her again, this time with no small talk. "I heard something," she said, sliding into the cafe booth. "Tyler's been telling people you left in a tantrum, that you threatened the family, that you're unstable. Of course, and that your parents don't need your money, that they're perfectly fine without you." Elizabeth smiled, not out of amusement, but weariness. "I'm sure they are." But she knew better. Richard's pension was modest, and Vivian hadn't worked in over 30 years. The house wasn't even paid off. She had covered the shortfall every month without complaint. For years they had lived well because of her. It took 3 more days for the tone to change. First, a message from Vivian, longer this time, edged with desperation beneath the politeness. "We weren't expecting you to do anything drastic. The taxes are due next week, and we just assumed." Elizabeth didn't reply. The following morning, Richard called. No message. He called again that night. Still no message. By New Year's Eve, a text arrived from an unfamiliar number. "You can't just abandon your family like this. We're still your parents. This is cruel." She recognized the phrasing. Richard, short, punishing, not a request, a verdict. And then came the call from the bank. "Miss Worthington, we're reaching out to confirm a delinquency notice sent to the property at 215 Glenview Drive. The mortgage payment for January has not been received." Elizabeth thanked the woman, hung up, and exhaled slowly. She had known it would come to this, that they would pretend to be proud, pretend they didn't need her, until the truth came knocking. And now it had. Later that night, as snow began to fall outside her hotel window, she sat on the floor with a glass of wine, sorting through years of bank statements, all the payments she had made, all the cards she had paid off. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing it down. Not to send to them. She wasn't ready for that yet. But she needed to see it, to know that she hadn't imagined it. $6,211 a month on average, sometimes more, over 9 years, more than $670,000. She stared at the total. It didn't feel real. She didn't cry. Instead, she opened her laptop and began researching real estate lawyers and estate accountants. Not for revenge, but for records, for dignity. Let them squirm. She wouldn't be guilted again. It started subtly. The first time they came by, they didn't even ask. Vivian showed up on a Saturday morning without calling, clutching a paper bag of blueberry muffins from a bakery Elizabeth hadn't liked since college. "I thought you might want company," her mother said too brightly, standing on the hotel threshold like someone who'd wandered into a stranger's life by mistake. Elizabeth let her in out of politeness. It had been weeks since the dinner, weeks of silence, then rumors, then cold texts, and now muffins. They sat awkwardly in the room's 2 chairs. Vivian asked about work, the nonprofit, the weather in Boston. She didn't bring up Christmas. She didn't mention Richard. Her face was a little paler, her hands a little more fragile, but the performance was the same, distance disguised as concern. "I know things were said," she murmured once, eyes on the window. "But your father's had a lot on his mind. He doesn't always think before he speaks." Elizabeth didn't reply. She just sipped her tea and waited. "I told him he went too far," Vivian continued, softer now. "But well, you know how men are." Elizabeth set the cup down. "No, Mom. I know how he is." Vivian flinched slightly. The conversation didn't last much longer. After she left, Elizabeth returned to her legal pad, checking her notations of past payments. Part of her wanted to believe her mother had come to make peace, but another part, sharper and older, knew better. It wasn't peace. It was panic. A week later, it was Richard. He didn't knock, just buzzed the front desk, and by the time Elizabeth got the call, he was already in the lobby. She came down out of courtesy, or maybe curiosity. He stood stiffly in a wool coat too heavy for the weather. "I was in the area," he said flatly. "No, you weren't," Elizabeth answered. He didn't smile. "I thought maybe we could talk." They sat on a bench outside, just out of earshot of the front doors. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just spoke about how families are complicated, about responsibility, about mutual respect. She let him talk. She didn't interrupt. Then he mentioned the house, how it was a lot to manage, how he and Vivian were exploring other arrangements, how mortgages and taxes get harder to juggle in retirement. "You made it clear I wasn't welcome in that house," Elizabeth said evenly. "You're still our daughter." "No," he said. "I was your investment." He flinched for just a second. "I don't owe you any more," she finished. He didn't argue, but his mouth twitched slightly before he left. That night, when she returned to her room, something felt off. Her laptop, which she had left closed, was ajar. Her folders were slightly misaligned on the desk. She hadn't noticed before, but now the disorder screamed at her. 2 financial files were left slightly open. Her phone charger unplugged and loosely coiled. A notebook she always kept zipped was unzipped. She froze. She'd had her documents spread out the day before. Records, statements, legal contact info, her preliminary letter of disengagement from the joint account her parents had access to. Her first thought wasn't fear. It was confirmation. They weren't visiting to reconcile. They were probing, panicking, trying to understand how far they'd pushed her and what they could still salvage. She double-checked her accounts, her passwords, enabled 2-factor authentication, and booked a small lockbox at a bank downtown. Then she packed up her folders and moved them out of the room. She wouldn't stay in that hotel another night. By morning, she had checked into another place under a different name, just in case. By the end of January, the snow had thickened, and so had the silence from her family. Elizabeth was now staying in a small, quiet apartment she'd sublet from a friend. The hotel had started to feel like a target. Here, she felt less visible, safer. She didn't answer unknown numbers anymore. She filtered her emails. She kept her laptop in a locked drawer when she wasn't home and checked her door twice before bed. She wasn't paranoid. She was prepared. Or so she thought. On a gray Tuesday morning, Elizabeth received a call from her bank's fraud department. "Hi, Miss Worthington. This is Karen from First Driver Security. We noticed several failed login attempts on your online account. 7 to be precise, all from different IP addresses in the last 24 hours. Elizabeth's heart slowed. Where from? Karen hesitated. The majority appeared to originate from her home state, one from out of state, and one international, possibly routed through a VPN. Elizabeth didn't know what to say. What are they trying to access? Checking account primarily, then savings, then your wire transfer history, Karen said. Her mouth went dry. Is this an account you share with anyone? Karen asked. No, she said quickly. It's mine alone. I don't share credentials. All right, we've locked down the account for now, and will issue new credentials via secure mail. I strongly recommend setting up biometric access if possible. Elizabeth thanked her and hung up. She stared at the phone, stomach twisting. It had to be a coincidence, a data breach, a phishing bot, something explainable. But the timing, the patterns, the exact accounts they had tried to access, the ones she used to pay her parents' mortgage and utilities. She called Mara. Do you think it's them? She asked, voice quiet. There was a long pause. I think you already know it is, Mara finally said. You just don't want it to be true. Elizabeth sat down on the floor. How could they do this? They think you're an asset, Mara said. Not a person. Elizabeth didn't respond. She stared at her phone screen until it went dark. The next evening, while walking back from the grocery store, she saw it for a second. A familiar silver car parked across the street. She recognized her father's old sedan. She kept walking, heart in her throat. Didn't look twice. Didn't confirm. But 2 nights later, it was there again. And then again. Not always close. Never more than once in a day. But enough to notice. Enough to know. She didn't call the police. Not yet. She didn't have proof. And the last thing she wanted was to escalate without being sure. She told herself it might not be them, that it might be coincidence, that her mind might be playing tricks. But she started keeping her curtains closed. She started walking with her keys clenched in her fist. She started double-checking the back seat of her car before getting in. She didn't want to believe it. Not her parents. Not the people she had supported, protected, tried to love. But trust, once broken, doesn't bend. It snaps. And the pieces can cut long after they've fallen. It was a cold Thursday afternoon when Mara called, her voice tense, more serious than Elizabeth had ever heard it. Are you alone right now? She asked. Elizabeth froze. Yes. Why? I need to tell you something, and I didn't want to text it. I didn't want it in writing. Elizabeth sat down slowly. Go on. Mara hesitated, then said, I ran into Tyler. Elizabeth didn't speak, didn't breathe. He doesn't know we've been talking, Mara continued. We bumped into each other at a bar downtown. He was drunk and stupid. What did he say? Mara's voice was calm but carried a tremor beneath it. He said, You think you're safe? That you think walking away means you win? He laughed. He said you'd pay for it soon. Elizabeth gripped the edge of the table. That sounds like him. That's not all, Mara added. He told someone loudly that it was his idea to cut you off, that he convinced your parents to stop pretending. He said if you wouldn't hand things over willingly, you'd be forced. A long silence followed. Elizabeth whispered, He's the one who pushed them. He is, and he's involved in whatever's happening now. I don't know how far it goes, but Liz, I think you're being followed. Elizabeth leaned back, the room spinning for a moment. I thought it was just my parents. I think they're all involved, and I think Tyler's leading it. Later that evening, Elizabeth opened the tracking app she'd installed after noticing the silver sedan. She'd managed to discreetly attach a tracker to the bumper one night when it was parked down the street. It pinged again. Same location, 4 blocks from her new apartment. Sitting. waiting. She stared at the screen. It had to be her brother. She never remembered him being cruel. Arrogant, yes. Ungrateful. Careless. But not this. Not someone who could hurt her. But memory had a way of rewriting itself. She thought back to childhood. The quiet favoritism. How he'd steal from her room and watch silently while she was punished. How he lied about her attitude, shaping her into the problem. And Richard always listened. Maybe Tyler had always known exactly what he was doing. That night, Elizabeth didn't sleep. She sat with a pen and notebook, drafting a police report. She didn't submit it yet, but she needed it ready. She made copies of her financial records, login changes, screenshots of failed attempts, and every message from her family. One copy went to a lawyer she found online that night, another into a secure digital vault. They would not trap her again. Not financially, not emotionally, not physically. The next day, she noticed someone following her from the grocery store. Not the sedan this time. Someone on foot. A man in a beanie and gray coat, walking too slowly, glancing too often. She ducked into a bookstore, waited 20 minutes, then looped back through a different street. He was gone, for now. Mara called that evening. "You need to consider going to the police." "I'm almost there," Elizabeth said. "Don't wait too long," Mara replied quietly. "They're not playing fair." Elizabeth nodded, unseen. They never did. It was no longer about fear. It was about control. Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table in the small apartment, a whiteboard propped against the wall, half covered in notes and arrows. She had moved beyond hiding. Now she was planning. The shift gave her something she hadn't felt in months. Power. "They need to believe you're vulnerable," Mara said over the phone. "That you're still confused, still scared. If we draw them out, we'll finally have something solid." Elizabeth nodded, studying her handwriting, dates, vehicle sightings, suspicious locations. "And if they're watching you," Mara added gently, "they already are. You just have to let them think it's working." The trap wasn't complicated, but it had to feel real. Elizabeth would move back into her original hotel under her own name, resurface publicly on social media with vague, cheerful updates, and behave as if she'd let her guard down. At the same time, she asked 3 friends, former colleagues she trusted without question, to stay in the hotel room next to hers. 2 men and a woman. Quiet, capable, loyal. She didn't explain everything. "I'm dealing with a family situation," she said. "It's escalated. I just need you nearby." They didn't ask more. They didn't need to. On Friday morning, Elizabeth checked back into the hotel. She kept the curtains drawn but left the desk cluttered. Folders, envelopes, her laptop positioned where it could be seen from the hallway if someone opened the door. The decoy laptop was old, wiped clean, filled with meaningless spreadsheets. The papers were real, but harmless. Old nonprofit reports, irrelevant financials. She instructed the front desk. No calls transferred, no visitors without approval. She bought pepper spray. She slept with it beside her. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then on the 4th night, she returned from a walk and noticed the lock, slightly scratched. Nothing was missing. Nothing overtly moved. But on the white envelope labeled "Account Summary Fee," someone had left an oily fingerprint. Elizabeth photographed it calmly and sent it to her lawyer. That same night, one of her friends texted from the adjacent room. "He's back. Same guy in the sedan. Just parked across the street. Been there since 6. Elizabeth's stomach tightened. It wasn't just surveillance anymore. It was anticipation. She waited 2 more days. Then she posted something on her old Facebook account, one she hadn't touched in months. Thankful to finally be healing. Everything's back on track, ready to move forward. grateful for those who stood by me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't false. But it was bait. The next morning, the fingerprinted envelope was gone. In its place, a single sheet of paper had been slid under the door. Elizabeth unfolded it slowly. A printout of a wire transfer from 5 years ago, one she had made to cover Tyler's legal fees. Across the bottom, in handwriting she recognized, "You owe us." One way or another. Elizabeth did not scream. She didn't cry. She didn't burn the note or tear it to shreds. She read it once, then again, and made a copy. The next day, she contacted her attorney, Anne, a woman recommended by Mara's colleague, and emailed everything. The photos, fingerprints, login logs, texts, and now the note. Within the hour, Anne replied, "You have more than enough. This isn't just harassment. It borders on fraud and coercion. We move now." Elizabeth gave the green light. For the first time in her life, she prepared to take her family to court. It wasn't about revenge. Not exactly. It was about truth. Over the following week, Elizabeth coordinated with Anne to freeze any remaining joint assets, revoke powers of attorney she hadn't realized were still active, and submit an official police report with all documentation. She expected her parents to panic, but she didn't expect what came next. 3 days after the complaint was filed, Elizabeth received an invitation, a handwritten letter from Vivian. "Elizabeth, please come to the house just once. No anger, no drama, just talk. Your father wants to make peace. We all do. Love, Mom." Elizabeth showed it to Anne. "What do you think?" Anne didn't blink. "I think it's a setup. Go if you want. But don't go alone. And don't go unarmed." Elizabeth agreed. She asked one of her friends from the hotel team to wait nearby in a car with a recording device running. Mara insisted on being on call. Elizabeth wore a wire. When she arrived, the house was quiet. Nothing like the tension-filled holiday she had left behind. Vivian met her at the door, looking older, worn down in just a few weeks. "Thank you for coming," she said. "He's in the living room." Elizabeth stepped inside. The air smelled like lemon polish and denial. Richard sat by the fireplace, whiskey in hand. Tyler leaned against the far wall, arms folded, smirking. "Sit down," Richard said. Elizabeth didn't move. "No. Say what you want." Richard looked up slowly. "You've made a mess." "No," Elizabeth said. "I cleaned one up." He didn't argue. Tyler spoke instead. "You really think the courts will side with you? Family disputes go nowhere. You'll waste your time and money." Elizabeth pulled out her phone. "Then why are you so nervous?" He looked away. She reached into her bag and removed a thin envelope. "Here. These are copies of everything I filed. Police report, financial audit, lawyer's letter of intent. You've got 3 days to respond before this becomes public." Vivian blinked. "Elizabeth, don't do this. We're your family." Elizabeth turned to her. "Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't stalk. Family doesn't threaten." Richard's voice was cold. "You think you're better than us?" "No," she said. "But I'm done letting you treat me like I'm less." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "By the way," she said quietly, "check your bank accounts. You're going to see the money I gave you over the years has been classified as non-repayable gifts, documented, declared, and irrevocable. You can't sue me for a dime. You'd have to admit fraud yourselves." Tyler's face drained of color. Elizabeth walked out. 2 weeks later, the charges were filed. The district attorney's office reviewed the police report and corroborating evidence. Failed login attempts, wire fraud threats, surveillance footage from the hotel. But it was the note in Tyler's handwriting with financial records attached that tipped everything. Elizabeth didn't attend the initial court appearance. Her lawyer handled it, and she received updates by email. Tyler was officially under investigation for attempted extortion, cyber harassment, and unlawful surveillance. The state froze his accounts pending review. Her parents weren't charged criminally, but the court order named them as parties in the civil suit Elizabeth filed: undue enrichment, emotional distress, misappropriation of funds. They would be called to testify. The family name, once carefully protected and rehearsed, was now whispered among neighbors and former friends. In quiet suburbs, shame echoes loudest. Vivian sent another letter, frantic cursive on stationery. "You've ruined everything. We only wanted what was fair. You never loved us. You'll die alone." Elizabeth folded it into a drawer without reading again. She no longer needed the words to understand them. She knew it had never been about love. It had always been about control. And when control disappeared, they collapsed. Tyler tried to contact her twice through a blocked number, once by email. His lawyer, she assumed. But her legal team handled it all. She didn't engage. Not once. She owed them nothing. Not a conversation. Not a response. The silence this time was hers, and it was earned. In the spring, Elizabeth moved into a townhouse on a quiet street in a different city. Nothing fancy, just a place that smelled like possibility. Mara helped her unpack the kitchen. They didn't talk about Christmas or court or family. They just poured wine, arranged the glasses, and listened to records like in college. One night, a neighbor waved from across the lawn, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and an old Labrador. Elizabeth waved back. For the first time in a long time, the gesture didn't feel like pretending. She was rebuilding, not from disaster, but from survival. She began a project close to her heart, a legal aid program for women over 40 who'd been financially manipulated or emotionally coerced by family. She called it Silent Daughters. Every week, she sat across from women who had once believed it was their job to hold their families together until it broke them, and every week she told them what Mara once told her. "You're not crazy, and you're not alone. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. And healing." Spring turned into summer, and with it came a warmth Elizabeth hadn't known in years. Not the sun on her skin, but something softer, more internal. The absence of fear, the end of pretending. Her days fell into a steady rhythm. Mornings began with coffee on her tiny balcony, lavender blooming in a ceramic pot she bought from a local artist. She read the paper old-fashioned style, folded across her lap, phone on silent. Silent Daughters grew faster than she expected. After a local article profiled the initiative, dozens of emails poured in from women, older, younger, newly divorced, widowed, still married, each with the same story, different voices. I gave them everything. She still remembered the way the candlelight danced against the polished crystal, how the scent of cinnamon and roasted ham filled the room, and how no one seemed to breathe when the words left her father's mouth. "I've put up with you for a long time, but I've had enough. Get out of here." The silence that followed wasn't shock, it was agreement, and that was the part that stung the most. Elizabeth leaned back in the hotel chair, eyes red, fingers curled around a lukewarm cup of tea. It had been 3 days since that dinner, and the scene replayed in nauseating detail. Every look, every clenched jaw, every fork tapping on china. She tried to piece it together. How had it come to this? Their relationship had never been easy. Richard Worthington had always been a man of principles, rigid as steel, with a voice that could silence a room. He demanded excellence, obedience, and control. And Elizabeth was stubborn, always questioning, refusing to sit still, never fitting. The mold he tried to cast. But at 41, she was executive director of a successful nonprofit, financially independent, admired by colleagues, paying her parents' mortgage, their medical bills, even groceries. She had done it out of duty, maybe guilt, hoping love might one day be earned. The days before Christmas were strained. Vivian had called twice about the tree. Your father doesn't want a fake one this year. If you're coming, you can afford to do it right. Elizabeth offered to send a delivery, but the point was obedience, presence, submission. When she arrived, the house already felt like a pressure cooker. Her father barely looked up. Still wearing those heels, huh? Her mother flitted between rooms, overcompensating with casseroles and spiced cider, avoiding any conversation deeper than weather. Tyler brought his new girlfriend, pretending not to see the tension choking every hallway. By Christmas Eve, Elizabeth had considered leaving, almost booking a flight back to Boston, telling herself she'd sent a card and money and be done. But guilt and pride kept her there. She wouldn't give her father the satisfaction of thinking he'd won. And then came Christmas dinner. The confrontation wasn't loud, but it was final. A comment about Tyler's girlfriend, a sarcastic remark about her father's outdated views, and the explosion happened in slow motion. She retreated upstairs to the study, the only room no one entered, frost feathering the window edges, casting soft white shadows. Downstairs, Vivian hummed faintly. Tyler talked loudly about a startup. Natalie helped with ribbons, voice overly sweet. Elizabeth had tried to contribute. She bought the tree, the wine, paid for the food, but every interaction carried an edge. That night, she overheard her parents arguing faintly through the vent. "She makes everything about herself," Richard said. "Always has. All that money she throws around, it's just noise." Elizabeth hadn't cried, but the words hollowed something inside her. She had come out of duty, misplaced loyalty, but the house didn't want her. It wanted her money and her silence. The next day, she noticed subtle digs, cold remarks, and constant judgment. She began retreating, observing, recording. Her parents weren't seeking reconciliation. They were probing, panicking. She installed trackers, strengthened passwords, booked a lockbox, and moved to a new apartment under a different name. The silver sedan appeared repeatedly, and then a man on foot followed her. Mara warned, "They're not just your parents. Tyler's leading it. You're being followed." Elizabeth documented everything: failed login attempts, text messages, surveillance, financial records. She filed police reports and engaged a lawyer, Anne. They froze joint assets, revoked powers of attorney, and began formal proceedings. Every attempt by her family to reach her, letters, visits, emails, was met with firm silence. Then, the trap. She returned to her old hotel under her name, acted as if her guard was down, while trusted friends stayed nearby with recording devices. Within days, scratches on her hotel lock confirmed her suspicions. Fingerprints, notes, surveillance. They were watching, anticipating, testing. Elizabeth responded strategically, calmly, legally. She posted on social media, baiting them, and a note slipped under her door confirmed Tyler's involvement. "You owe us." She sent everything to Anne, green-lighted action, and for the first time prepared to take her family to court. Not for revenge, but for truth. The district attorney reviewed all evidence. Tyler was investigated for extortion, cyber harassment, and unlawful surveillance, his accounts frozen. Her parents, at least criminally, were spared, but named in civil suits. Letters flew, threats scribbled, shame whispered through quiet suburbs. But Elizabeth didn't engage. Spring brought a townhouse in a new city. Mara helped unpack. They poured wine, listened to records, and for the first time, Elizabeth felt alive again. She started Silent Daughters, a legal aid initiative for women manipulated by family, telling them what Mara had told her. "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." Saturdays were spent walking miles, sorting forms, drinking rosé, healing. In July, she adopted Franklin, a golden retriever with soulful eyes and one floppy ear. He followed her everywhere, slept at her desk, barked at delivery trucks like a guard. She no longer jumped at footsteps, no longer scanned parking lots, no longer clutched keys in her hand. Court proceedings continued, but the outcome no longer mattered. She had already won. By August, she spoke at conferences about boundaries, financial independence, reclaiming your story. A woman whispered, "I thought it was just me." Elizabeth placed her hand over hers. "It never is." In September, a package arrived. No return address, with a faded photograph of 7-year-old Elizabeth, arms around a young golden retriever, and on the back, in unfamiliar handwriting, "You were always strong. You just didn't know it yet." She kept it on her desk beside Franklin's treats. Autumn brought calm. Life was no longer performance. No traps, no guilt, no love to earn. Just sunlight through a window, a dog at her feet, and the knowledge she had survived, rebuilt, and thrived on her own terms.